roots in the South that really had a lot to do with where the music came from, you know.
So when you started researching, for example, African-American string band music, did you find, was there a period in the 20s or 30s in the South where you might have a string band that was mixed race?
I mean, there were a few, probably more than we know, you know, because in some areas it was almost cool, in some areas it was like, that's not gonna happen. But there are very clear examples of mixed race string bands. The Georgia Yellowhammer is the very first, you know, Creole musician to record with a white fiddler. I mean, there are these, you know, from the 20s and 30s, these instances. There's documentation out there of this, you know. But you had at that time the music industry coming in and forcing categories where there weren't categories before, and you start having black bands being told what to play and white bands being told what to play, you know, whereas before they shared a common repertoire that was all across the South. Sorry, it's just like, it's all very recent in my brain, so it infuriates me because, you know, the strength of American music is the very fact that it crossed all the genres. Yeah. You know, is that you had people playing all this stuff, and that's why it's worldwide so beloved, because it has all of that mix. People recognize themselves in every piece of American music. So when you start forcing those categories apart and they start going down these narrow roads, that's when you lose what makes it great, I think.
Yeah. Rhiannon, the next song kind of goes way past what we've been talking about. Tell the story of how you came to write At the Purchaser's Option.
Part of what I found my mission to be is to create a space for these voices. You know, traditionally black women haven't had much of a voice in the history of slavery, and things that happened to them were pretty horrific, you know, kind of constantly across the board. So I find that I read these things and they just want to be songs, you know. And as I was reading this stuff, I came across an advertisement. It was for a young woman, and it was actually in a New England paper. So this is in the 1700s, and it was for young women for sale, and, you know, these things were very common. People were commodities, so it was like putting a used car ad. You put an ad in the paper, you were selling somebody. And she was for sale, and the end of the ad is what prompted the song. It was, she has with her a 9-month-old baby who's at the purchaser's option. These are the words in the ad, and it just made me think about what this young woman's life was like, you know. How do you get up in the morning knowing that nothing is under your control? Your life, your child's life. Like, I have 2 children, and I just take for granted that I'm gonna wake up and have my kids, you know. And for women all over the country for hundreds of years, that was not their reality. Their reality was, I have to love this child as much as I can until I don't know what's gonna happen. You know, I read stories of women who they had multiple children, and they'd come home and one would be gone from the field, and then they come home and then another one would be gone. I mean, can you imagine what it takes to live through that? So I mean, I can't either, really, but this song came out of reading a lot of these stories and sort of just trying to let the voice come out.
All right, let's hear the song. It's called At the Purchaser's Option. Rhiannon Giddens has picked up the banjo once again, and Dirk Powell back on the fiddle, playing live here in the studio.
Is facing a sentence that ranges from about 9 years to life in prison. A judge will decide on her punishment in a few weeks, and she's now in a Virginia jail, awaiting her fate. Her glamorous life and the exploits of her and her husband and the hold they had over the violent narco-trafficking world have come to an end.
Tara McKelvey there on the legal situation for Emma Coronel Aspuro, known as the drug cartel diva. Bringing to a close the newsroom program here on the BBC World Service with me, Joe Lineup. Don't forget to download our Global News podcast wherever you get your podcasts and get everything else on the BBC website.
This is the BBC World Service, exploring why gold is so highly revered.
Compared to any other asset, I think gold is the asset.
It has the highest sensitivity and receptivity of the energy from the sun.
We treasure it, barter with it, and adorn ourselves with it. But why has there always been such a fascination with gold across all cultures?
In some ways, gold is the perfect money. It's hard to get, lovely to look at, can be cut and shaped without losing its value, and it's incredibly hardy.
I am jewelry designer Rajvi Vora, and in the first of this 3-part series, I'll be digging deep into gold's ancient history.
For the ancient Egyptians, gold had an extraordinary value because for them it was what the flesh of the gods was made out of.
The Golden Age of Gold.
Wednesday at 8 and 19 GMT.
Imagine finding out that the one thing you truly believe in, the thing you've dedicated your life to, is not at all what it seemed. I am Ashleen Kaur on the BBC World Service, and I'm going to tell you a story which collapsed my world. Over the last year, I've been investigating allegations of abuse at one of the world's biggest yoga organizations, a yoga school that meant a great deal to me personally. That's the first episode of Guru Living a Lie after the news.
BBC News. The United States says it will continue negotiating with Iran to revive the international nuclear deal after the election of the hardline cleric Ebrahim Raisi as the next Iranian president. The State Department said the US regretted that Iranians had been denied a free and fair electoral process. The number of people in Brazil who've died with coronavirus has now passed 500,000 as it struggles to cope with a third wave of the pandemic. 2,300 people have died of COVID in the past day. Intensive care units are close to capacity in most Brazilian states. Armenians are voting in a snap parliamentary election that will set the course for their country after its recent war. The vote is being held in an attempt to resolve the political crisis caused by Armenia's disastrous war with Azerbaijan last year over the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Polling stations open in France shortly for elections in 17 regions and about 100 departments, which have been delayed because of the pandemic. Regional elections are being closely watched because it is less than a year until the next presidential poll. Israelis and Palestinians have clashed again in a Jerusalem neighborhood that has seen weeks of tension over the planned evictions of Palestinian families. Palestinian media say the homes of Arab residents in the Sheikh Jarrah district were attacked. Right-wing Israeli groups accuse Palestinians of attacking Jewish people. Taiwan is due to receive 2.5 million doses of coronavirus vaccine today, donated by the United States. Taiwan has accused China of interfering in its efforts to acquire vaccines from Western manufacturers. US officials say the donation demonstrates Washington's commitment to the island and its democracy. And the athletes' village for the Tokyo Olympics has been unveiled to the media. The village on the Tokyo waterfront will house 18,000 athletes and officials in high-rise buildings. BBC News.
I am Ashleen Kaur, a BBC journalist and a passionate yoga teacher. The story I'm about to tell you is deeply personal. Trigger warning first, this episode contains graphic sexual references. For me, it all began in November 2014. For the first time, I stepped out of the comforts of my own home to move into a yoga community, or an ashram. It's a place where people live together to grow and evolve spiritually. So this one that I went to was the Shivananda Yoga Ashram in the South Indian state of Kerala. It was in the middle of nowhere in an undisturbed forest overlooking a lake, over 300 strangers living together. And not to forget the dozens of mosquitoes that were giving us company. Over time, my bond with the organization became much stronger, and and its people became my family. Fast forward to December 2019. Shivananda and I were over. Like a fragile house of cards, my whole world came crashing down. All because of one Facebook post. This is a story of faith and devotion. Also, a story of betrayal and pain. A story that broke my heart.
My roles were deeply confusing. Student, secretary, mother, some even said my daughter. One time I could actually smell fear coming off me. I wanted him to die. I wanted him to die for my sake.
You're listening to Guru on the BBC World Service. This is episode 1, Living a Lie.
Serve, love, give, purify, meditate, realize.
The voice you hear is Swami Vishnudevananda, the founder of Shivananda Yoga. And that was him chanting back in the 1980s. Now, I should add here that this isn't his story. It is not about Swami Vishnu, but you do to know who he was. So when I found Shivananda Yoga, it was not only one of the world's...